For the Silk Road, I had like this weird perspective on it because I interviewed the Dread Pirate Roberts before the creator of the Silk Road, who went by the pseudonym the Dread Pirate Roberts, this like first dark web drug kingpin. I interviewed him myself before he was caught, before he was identified, and like turned out to be this 29-year-old guy, Ross Ulbricht in
Was
Texas.
the guy you interviewed, sorry to interrupt, but
Mhm.
when you interviewed Dread Pirate Roberts, are you sure that was Ross, or could that have been somebody before him?
It's a fair question. I think it was Ross.
Hmm.
I think that you know, I've turned that question over a lot of times since then. Of course, when I spoke to the Dread Pirate Roberts, or didn't speak to him, I said, by the way, I said he was caught in Texas. He was caught in California, but he's from Texas.
Mm.
And when I communicated with him, that was over the Silk Road anonymous messaging system. Just want to be really clear. Like, I was exchanging text messages over the Tor anonymity system with him, basically. So you never know exactly. And I got the impression just sometimes, I think I interviewed him for like 4 or 5 hours, and
Wow.
I got the impression that he was maybe even consulting with somebody as he talked to me. Like, he would take a while with some answers. And I know that the Dread Pirate Roberts had this kind of second in command who called himself Variety Jones, and based on covering his trial, Ross Ulbricht's trial. Eventually, Ross Ulbricht's laptop, by the way, was seized with all of his chat records on it. He tried to, he had full disk encryption on his laptop, and if he had just been able to close the lid of it, he could have protected all of that evidence, which I think made him kind of overconfident in how much he could store on that laptop. But the FBI, in this elaborate sting operation in the San Francisco library, grabbed his laptop out of his hands with an undercover agent, got everything. So you could see his conversations with Variety Jones and all of the other people working for him in his chat logs, which is crazy that he kept those. And you could see that Variety Jones at one point suggested this idea, like, call yourself the Dread Pirate Roberts. Then if you're ever caught, you can tell this whole story, like from The Princess Bride, the movie, where that name comes from. That's just a kind of rotating handle that it's inherited by one kingpin of the Silk Road after another, and you can say you acquired it from somebody else who created it, and then pretend to be the person who created it but then sold it, and then that'll cover your tracks. It was really brilliant, honestly, as cover stories go. So you can actually see the Dread Pirate Roberts, probably Ross, I think almost certainly Ross, doing this in my interview with him, where he says, actually, no, I didn't create the Silk Road. I bought it from its creator. And that seemed to be laying the groundwork for the defense he actually would use in his trial, which is that Ross Ulbricht, in court said, I just created the Silk Road as an economic experiment. Then it was bought from me by the Dread Pirate Roberts.
Right.
And the real criminals who ran the Silk Road and turned it into this giant narcotics, bazaar, tricked me in the last minute into coming back and running it again just before I was caught. It's kind of it's a bit of an unlikely story. Not just a bit. It was a pretty weird defense, and it kind of fell apart when this was a big surprise at trial. The prosecution put a guy on the stand who had traced all of the Silk Road's transactions on the blockchain, and showed that basically for years, money had been flowing, bitcoins, from the Silk Road server to Ross Ulbricht's laptop. So he was in charge of it for all of that time, including the time when or he at least was reaping the profits from it all of that time, including when I interviewed the Dread Pirate Roberts. I know a lot of people are really skeptical of these stories. I have tried to apply as much skepticism as I can as well to this notion that Ross Ulbricht is the Dread Pirate Roberts, or the only Dread Pirate Roberts. A lot of people are particularly skeptical. I just want to air this out right away, about the claim that he had people killed, right? And say he was never actually charged with that crime in court, which is true. And that is, he was charged with this kingpin statute of kind of a general, running of a massive criminal enterprise. and conspiracy and things, but he was not charged in the case that was actually brought to trial with murder, even though he's accused of like having paid for the killings of one of his employees and like people who he thought threatened the Silk Road and scammed him and stuff. I was skeptical of that too, and I think that in all fairness, that absolutely should have been tried in court, given that now he is serving this life sentence.
Yeah,
federal prison.
He's serving the same sentence as El Chapo. Is that right?
I mean, it's a life sentence. Like it's the
I
maximum.
I thought it was double
life.
Yeah.
Yes, double life. You know, and may never see the light of day again. And I think that is unjust. Just to be clear, I think that's a crazy over sentencing, especially given that he was not actually convicted of murder or attempted murder or conspiracy to commit murder or anything. But the same day that in his trial, which I attended like every minute of it in Manhattan courtroom, like the same day that like the prosecution showed that they could trace the Silk Road cryptocurrency from the server to his laptop, they also showed transactions from his laptop to a would-be contract killer for these alleged murders, you know, and they were timed exactly right. They were the exact amounts. You could see his chat logs where he's saying to like somebody he thought was a Hell's Angel who was going to do these killings for him, okay, here's the money. And then you see it on the blockchain. So, and I can see those transactions myself. I don't even have to depend on like a source to tell me that. I can look at the blockchain and see that stuff. That's the power of cryptocurrency tracing. I mean, and Ross, I'm sure, thought that these transactions were untraceable and anonymous, and it's the opposite. Like a journalist, can look at the receipts basically, you know, on the blockchain. So
don't you have to know his wallet address though?
Right. So, and those did come from the prosecution, to be clear, but they were, you know, they were aired out. Those were shown in court. The defense had a chance to say no, those are not his addresses, and they did not. You know, so it's like you have to start doing some really convoluted thinking to imagine that Ross was not the Dread Pirate Roberts when I interviewed the Dread Pirate Roberts, and B, even that he didn't try to have these people killed. Like I am extremely sympathetic. Not extremely. I guess I would say I'm more sympathetic to Ross Ulbricht than just about any journalist who's covered these stories. I thought that the Silk Road was an interesting experiment trying to reduce violence in the drug trade, you know, by moving it into this virtual world, basically. And I thought that Ross was like an interesting principled person who collected ultimately millions and millions of dollars in drug money and never spent it, and really believes in what he was doing as a kind of like political experiment. He saw himself as a revolutionary who was launching this like idealistic thing on the in a new world, you know, online. But I think that it's a story about kind of corrupted ideals of how Ross, despite his best intentions, was pulled into a situation where he felt like he had to do extremely dark and immoral things to protect the experiment that he had begun, you know. And that is tragic, but like I do believe that Ross did those things, that Ross did run this massive drug trade, for better or worse. Some people I think probably still think that was a good thing. And then and then I also think that he actually tried to have people killed, which is hard to defend.